Just a couple of weeks ago, I talked about a little girl. She was 3 at the time, Trinity, up in Jacksboro. And I talked about the fact that having learned from her about the importance of always being on, the importance of learning like a child, being like a child in terms of wonder and curiosity, and how important that was for us as adults to be aware that the children among us are always watching us in wonder and awe as we are representing God to them. I've talked several times, last week even, about the childlikeness that Jesus said we had to approach the living God, His Father, His Abba. And I've referenced children many times before, and I'm going to be doing that again today. So you'd be correct in thinking that a lot of my theological underpinnings have come from children. You can say that much of my knowledge about God in the last 20 years and understanding of Jesus in the last 20 years has come through little children and then seminary. Before the very first church, or before all of this, I became aware of it in the first church I was at, which is at Richland in Richardson and Garland, up in just right between the two. That's the name, Richland. And there was one Sunday, about a year after about 6 months after I'd gotten there, when the Sunday school teacher for 6, 7, and 8-year-olds was not able to come, so I took over that class that day and was in a room with about 5 or 6 little girls, all of them, 5, 6, 7 years old. And one of them was this little girl right here, Natasha. And by the way, her mother, Cindy, and stepfather, Steve, are here with us today, too. They knew I was going to talk about her. So. I read them the story of Jesus going against what the disciples were saying, going against what the people in the group were saying, and inviting the children to him, asking, no, Peter, get out of the way. Andrew, let the kids come up here. You have to be like one of these kids to enter the kingdom of heaven. And Jesus put them on his lap, and he cared for them. He loved them. And after we talked about that a little bit, I asked each of the little girls to draw a picture. And they drew pictures of the story I just read, or stories about Jesus that they knew, just kind of using up some time because I wasn't equipped that morning to be talking to little girls about big things, I thought. So they did their drawings and they showed them to me, and most of them, several of them, it was just pictures of Jesus standing there, pretty standard pictures, cute, nicely done, but pretty standard. A couple of them showed Jesus with a little kid on each hand, or maybe trying to draw something as a 7-year-old with Jesus in his lap. They all had kind of beards on, and one little girl had a cross. That's what she thought mostly about in terms of Jesus, was that cross which sticks in the head of so many little kids. But then there was Natasha's picture. It didn't fit. Where's Jesus in that? There's an umbrella and there's rain. How does that work? I didn't get it. So I asked Natasha to explain. And she said these words which have affected so much of who I am and what I do and how I try to present Jesus. She said these words, Jesus is like my mommy. I didn't know what to say. So I said, tell me about that. So she and the other little girls started giving me these reasons, these ideas, these thoughts about why that made perfect sense to them. Why doesn't it make any sense to you, Pastor David? The first thing she said, Natasha said, 6 years old I think at the time, "My mommy keeps me from getting wet in the rain." Well, yeah, that's what she drew a picture of. She represented it perfectly. And that was her first thought about how Jesus is like my mommy. She keeps me from getting wet in the rain. That's exactly how a 6-year-old says, she protects me. Jesus is like my mommy because he protects me. Matthew 11:28 and 29. "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened," maybe even wet, "and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." All of us learn those great, intangible ideas about love, beauty, grace, God in various ways. They change throughout our lives. They evolve throughout our lives in terms of meaning. But we learn about them first in concrete, tangible, and touchable form. Last night, Robbie and I were watching our grandson, talking with our grandson, Robbie, in Australia. He was with his mom. And as he was, tumbling over little bikes and jumping off the couch and eating food with both hands, he said to his mother, our daughter, he said to her, "Baby." And that had become a thing this last week, where when he says baby, he's 2 years old. He'll be 2 years old tomorrow. He wanted his mommy to pick him up and hold him like a baby. And she did. And she said this was just something brand new. And we watched him, and he just relaxed there like a little baby. He leaned in, closed his eyes, and even hugged his mommy. And then he got down and jumped back on the bike. And that's that mommy's love that one can always come back to. Learning it first with a mom who makes it possible for us then to lean against, hug, and come again and again to Jesus as children, no matter what our age. Luke 13:34. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill prophets and stone those who sent you, how often I have longed to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings. But you were not willing." Jesus calls himself here a mother hen, ready to gather us to him again. Are you willing? Are we willing? What else did that mean? I was asking the other girls too. One of them said, "Jesus is always with me, like my mommy." Hebrews 13:5. "Keep your lives free from the love of money and be content with what you have, because he has said, 'I will never leave you. I will always be at your side.'" Matthew 28:20. "And teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you. And remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the world." All of us in here are half mom. Her DNA has defined us, each of us, her and Dad's, of course, have defined each of us partly. We'll always be half mom, half dad. She and our dad and their mothers and fathers make us physically who we are. They predispose us also to a certain set of emotions which the culture around us shapes as much as they do. But again, who more prepares for us to seeing and then embracing the feminine aspects of Jesus. And how perfect for a child, Natasha, to recognize that. A child who is not yet conditioned by cultural ideas about gender and roles. Jesus is like my mommy. Simple. Why would Pastor David be asking us these questions? Finally, one of the girls said, Jesus is like my mommy because he has hair like my mommy. And I figured at that point the discussion was probably partway over. So we just drew some more pictures and gabbed the rest of the time. I've added a couple more thoughts, though, of my own. Moms, like Jesus, moms, always make sure you've got something to eat. John 21:12, Jesus said to them, come and eat. Now he said this is the third appearance Jesus had made to some of his disciples after the resurrection. And he said it to a number of people, a number of his disciples, who were on the beach with him as he was cooking a breakfast down there all by himself. They could see him. They were getting off their boats. He says, come over here, eat with me. And I try to imagine the nervousness, the anticipation, some of the fear that they must have had. Imagining sitting in front of Jesus, that close to him, eating a meal. It just wasn't that long before that they had abandoned him. They had left that upper room and gone out into the streets and hid. Peter, we have record of him even denying. Judas betraying. None of them visible except for one at the cross itself. I can imagine him. Is he going to ask us where we were while he was dying? But he welcomed them and said, come and eat. No indictment, no guilt trip, nothing of the sort. No matter how screwed up you may be at 21, 35, 45, or 60, a mom will go into the kitchen, knock the pans around, and say, here, eat. Is there a greater example of grace? Is there a greater example of Jesus than that simple act? Come and eat. Secondly, moms are always on our side. Moms are always on your side. Maybe not as enthusiastically sometimes as they were when you were playing soccer in the 6th grade. But some part of a mom will always, always, always be remembering, watching for, emphasizing, maybe even exaggerating that wide-eyed little boy or girl that they once knew. We see it on TV all the time. An interview with the mother of some guy who's just been caught after killing someone or kidnapping someone else. We see the mother there saying, he's a good boy. He's getting ready to go back to school. She ain't lying. She believes that. You moms understand that. Moms have hope for you, even in the very most difficult of times. I was thinking here of Saul, later to be Paul. Acts 9, verse 1. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Paul was a murderer. He was an intentional serial killer of these people who were following the way, new Christians. He went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found anyone who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jesus, to Jerusalem to stand trial. But as he was going along to Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground, heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" Paul asked, "Who are you, Lord?" And the reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Get up and enter the city." And Saul became Paul. Half the New Testament has been delivered through the bars of steel which tried to contain Paul the apostle, those notes into the world, those letters into eternity. Even in the most difficult of times, the most difficult of persons, like Paul, there's nobody worse than Saul. Even Saul, Jesus loved. Even Saul, Jesus cared for, had hope for, believed in. There's nothing you can do to stop a good mom's or God's love. Stopping God's love is not possible. 1 John 4:8, God is love. Natalie helped me to see that a good mom, even after she's gone, and many of you know this, a good mom can continue to be a revealer of the deepest truths that matter: love, forgiveness, and presence. In such moms, and thank God the world is full of them, in such moms we may, without even trying real hard, to see Jesus. And Natasha, by the way, what is she doing now? On May 1st, she had her own little baby. This is Grandma Cindy down here. I'd sent her a note that now you get to be Jesus to your little one. But you do too. Each of us, no matter what our age is, we get to be Jesus too, to somebody. And where do you start? You start right here. Jesus is like my mommy. Amen.